I have got to say, Spider-Man Miles Morales playing on the PlayStation 5 hooked up to an LG C10, wow, it just doesn't get any better than this. Alright guys, thank you for stopping by Steady Chaos Productions. As usual, I am your man, Steady Chaos. And as I promised when I got the PlayStation 5, here we are with some PlayStation 5 content. And the PlayStation 5 is hooked up to my LG C10. It is a 55-inch C10. And it's hooked up via a fiber optic HDMI 2.1 cable here. So there are absolutely no limitations. What you see here is native 4K HDR10 gameplay. It just looks absolutely amazing. I mean, for a launch game, it's crystal clear. But the biggest graphical difference that I am seeing so far between the PS5 and the PS4 are textures. The assets are so much cleaner, they're so much sharper. They're clearly 4K textures. They have to be, because look at Spider-Man's suit here. You can see all the fabric and the various little ripples in his arm and in his mask on the back of his head there. It's just the 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 RAM in the PlayStation 5 as opposed to the 8 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM in the PlayStation 4. It makes a massive difference, clearly. The textures are incredible in this game, and that is a great sign for things to come in the years ahead for the PlayStation 5. I'm really excited to see what developers like Naughty Dog can do with a PlayStation 5 console like this. I mean, the textures, just everywhere you look, the textures are high resolution, they're crispy clean, and especially on the character models though, like Spider-Man. His suit, look at his suit. And I gotta say, my GoPro Hero 8 4K camera here, it's not even really doing justice as to what I'm seeing sitting here in front of the screen. It looks so much better sitting here, just looking at the screen, about what, 4 feet away, I'd say. It's absolutely incredible. And of course, it doesn't hurt that this game, like I said, is rendered in native 4K, and everything is dynamically ray traced in this world. In this open world, I should say. So let me try to find a building with some windows so that I can show you what I mean. We have Spider-Man jumping up. Here we go. We got a building with some windows right here. Let's get some free fall points. Here we go. Now let us cling on to this building. Now look at the dynamically ray traced reflections here. You can see them all in the windows. And this is the case all across the city, from windows to doorways to wet surfaces on pavement. Everything is dynamically ray traced. Now the key to getting this is going into the settings of Spider-Man, going to the visual settings. Now graphics mode has to be in fidelity, okay? Now yes, you'll get 30 frames per second, but you'll also get native 4K. You'll also get what is pretty close to full ray tracing, enhanced lighting, and additional VFX. You'll also get additional temporal techniques that improve the base 4K image. So, I mean, it's just a treat to have it on fidelity. But there are also options if you want to run it in 60 FPS. If you want to run it in performance mode, you can get 60 FPS. But you will miss out on some of the added visual goodies like ray tracing and enhanced lighting, which will be scaled back. Ray tracing will be pretty much non-existent. Reflections will be replaced with pretty much cube maps, from what I can understand. But then they just recently patched in a new mode called Performance RT mode. Now this mode is also 60 frames per second and does have some very limited ray tracing. It's not the full suite of ray tracing that you get in fidelity mode, but there is ray tracing nonetheless. Regardless, for visual fidelity's sake, to show you what the PlayStation 5 can really do when hooked up to an LG C10, I wanted to stick to fidelity mode. The only other thing I did was turn off chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration, as it says there, provides a filmic effect where colors appear slightly shifted and out of focus at the image's corners. I really don't see the need for that, so I turned that off to keep it nice and clear. And then film grain I kept to 10. This game already has a pretty limited and light implementation of film grain, so I left it at 10. It's nothing like, say, The Last of Us Part 2. When that game first launched on the PlayStation 4, it had a ridiculous amount of grain, way too much. And eventually Naughty Dog introduced a film grain slider in one of their subsequent patches, which was very needed. But here, Spider-Man Miles Morales, it has just the right amount of film grain. Contrast I haven't gone into, but you can adjust this as well. If you want to turn it down, it makes the game brighter, but definitely ugly. You want to keep it at the default setting, which is 10. So we keep it right there. So those are my settings for in-game for Spider-Man Miles Morales. Now, if you go to the PlayStation 4 settings, go home, you go up to the gear, and you go to sound and screen, screen and video, I'm sorry. Video information right now, it says it's at 4K 60 FPS, and because we have HDMI 2.1, we're getting full RGB in HDR mode, which is basically Chroma 444, so you're getting full Chroma and you're getting full Luma information. There are no sacrifices for bandwidth limitations like you had in HDMI 2.0. And the resolution is set to 4K, HDR is automatic. I've already adjusted the HDR. I would highly recommend you do that to make sure that the HDR is kind of calibrated to your TV's capabilities. Deep color output is automatic and RGB range is automatic as it is recommended to keep it as such. So those are my settings in the PlayStation 5. Now let me jump into my LG C10 settings specifically for Spider-Man Miles Morales on the PlayStation 5. We go into picture settings, and of course we're in game mode. You want to stay in HDR game mode here. That it will give you the lowest input lag possible. Make sure you stay in game mode. If you start playing in standard mode, or you start playing in filmmaker mode or cinema, you're not going to get the lowest input lag. So you want to play in game mode. Aspect ratio 16:9, energy saving off. You don't want to turn energy saving on because it'll dim your screen. Additional settings, eye comfort mode off. HDMI deep color, make sure this is on for the specific port that you're using your PlayStation 5 with. If you don't have this turned on, then HDR will not render properly on your TV. Instant game response is on. That way when the TV detects the PlayStation 5 console, it makes sure that you're in game mode so you get the lowest input lag. AMD FreeSync Premium, you can have that off because the PlayStation 5 does not have FreeSync, which kind of sucks. And Filmmaker mode auto change off. You don't want to play in Filmmaker mode because, as I just said, you'll have a high input lag, so keep that off. OLED screensaver, logo luminance adjustment set to low, and then you come down to general, AI service, have all of these settings off. AI brightness control, picture pro, all that stuff off. You don't want to turn any of these AI options on, because what you'll be doing is adding processing, which by default adds input lag. All right, so we go back to picture. As I said, game mode, HDR game mode, OLED light and contrast to 100. I've said this many times before, but anytime you're playing an HDR game, ideally you want to have your TV set to its maximum brightness so that you get that maximum high dynamic range effect. So that you get that greatest divide or gap between your inky blacks and your bright highlights. And if you set your contrast and OLED light down to 60 or 70, you're just not going to be getting those bright specular highlights in HDR that you should be getting. Of course, this is your TV, so if you find that HDR is too bright with OLED light set to 100 and contrast set to 100, then by all means set it down to, 80, 70, or 60, whatever feels good to you. But ideally, for maximum HDR effect, you want to have OLED light and contrast at 100. Now here you see brightness I have at 46. Typically, I just leave this at 50, but we'll get back into this in a second. The reason why I have brightness at 46 is because of dynamic tone mapping, which I have on in this game. Dynamic tone mapping tends to brighten things up quite a bit across the board, and it can make things look a little bit too bright in certain shadow areas. It can make things look a little bit artificially bright in certain areas, so I try to set the brightness down towards 46 to compensate for that a little bit. But we'll talk about that some more once we get to dynamic tone mapping. Sharpness I have set to 5. Now this game is already being rendered, as I said, in native 4K, and it has 4K textures galore. This game is crispy clear. So there's really no need to add any sharpness above 10, 15, 20. I mean, you can if you want, if you really like sharpness and edge enhancement, which is what sharpness is, it's edge enhancement. Feel free, it's your TV if you want to set sharpness high, but because this game is already rendered at native 4K, I see no need to run sharpness much above 5. I wouldn't really go above 10 anyway in most games, as once you go above 10, it's been shown that you start adding a little bit of noise to your image, you can start adding a little bit of ringing to some of your edges by over sharpening the picture, so just keep things to around 10 or 5, maybe ideally. You could even go with 0 in this game because, like I said, the game is so sharp being rendered in native 4K that you really don't need much edge enhancement from the LG C10. And then color here, I have it pumped up to 60. Normally it's at 55 with HDR. I like it a little bit higher, particularly in a game like this. Spider-Man is a very colorful, bright, punchy, vibrant game. And I like to accentuate that brightness, that punchiness by adding a little bit more color and pumping it up towards 60. It's not so much color that you end up oversaturating the hell out of your image, you know, but it's enough color that it adds some really good punch, some really good pop. And you can see just by looking at Spider-Man's suit, you know, it looks nice and bright blue and it has some nice bright reds. Just think of Marvel's Avengers movies. They're bright, they have a lot of bright red and purple and orangish specular highlights when, you know, superheroes use their abilities. So having that color pumped up just a little bit accentuates all of that, and I really like it in a game like this. And so we go down to tint. I don't touch, that's at 0. Advanced controls, a lot of the stuff in here you don't really have to touch. You don't need to add dynamic contrast, you're already running HDR, so I would not turn that on. Now dynamic tone mapping, we talked about this a little bit with the brightness. Dynamic tone mapping basically means the TV dynamically tone maps the brightness on a scene-by-scene basis. It's not following a specific EOTF curve like it would if dynamic tone mapping were off, and the overall intended look is one of brightness, of punchiness, but at the same time maintaining specular highlight detail and contrast. So I really think that dynamic tone mapping works really well with this game because this game is such a bright, punchy comic book type look to it that dynamic tone mapping kind of goes hand in glove with it. You know, it makes the game look vibrant, it makes it look really colorful, and it makes it look, in my opinion, aesthetically pleasing. Now you could go with the other popular setting when it comes to dynamic tone mapping, which is HGIG. So HGIG, basically what this does is the console takes over the tone mapping from the TV. And with HGIG, what it will do is it will recognize your TV's brightness capabilities, and it will have your TV strictly follow the EOTF curve right up to its peak brightness, where there will be a hard clip. Now, when you get to that hard clip, that means information above that hard clip as it pertains to brightness will not be included in the picture. So you don't risk having, you know, 1000, 1500, 2000 nit information, say as it pertains to something like the sun here, being displayed on your TV in HGIG, because there's a hard clip at the TV's max brightness, which is like 800 to 850 nits. So if there's a hard clip there, that means that you can't have an image, or you won't have an image where specular details are blown out, like they might be on occasion in dynamic tone mapping. And that is why some people say that HGIG is generally more accurate than dynamic tone mapping. It creates an image that is slightly dimmer than dynamic tone mapping. Certainly that's the case. But it also preserves shadow detail and makes those darker areas look as intended by the developer. So I certainly get the allure of HGIG. It is, I would say, the more accurate picture setting for sure. But you can see how much it's dimmed the screen here. So if I were to go back to dynamic tone mapping on, 3, 2, 1, bam, look at how bright everything has gotten. Yes, it's not the most accurate looking image at times. It does sort of brighten up the whole screen on a global scale, I would say. But for the most part, it makes this game, which is, you know, a comic book game, which is supposed to be bright, colorful, and punchy. It makes this game just that, bright, colorful, and punchy. It really boils down to preference. I think dynamic tone mapping works well in this game, so I leave it on. And to compensate a little bit for the fact that dynamic tone mapping brightens everything up so much, I go back to the brightness here and I set it from 50 to 46. That just takes the edge off the dynamic tone mapping just a little bit and adds a little bit more balance, I think, to the image. So for me, dynamic tone mapping on. Now, super resolution, you don't need to use this artificial tool or metric. There's no need to add super resolution to a game that's already in native 4K. You're not going to be discerning any additional benefit. I mean, look, high, off, high, off. I don't notice any difference because this TV is a 4K TV and this game is already rendered at native 4K. So there's no need for super resolution at all. Color gamut is auto. That is technically the correct selection for your television. It's just leave it in auto. Your TV will automatically detect the correct color gamut based on the source that is being fed to it. So if you are watching SDR content, it'll run the gamut in Rec 709. If you are watching a 4K HDR movie, it'll run it in, DCI P3 or less commonly, Rec 2020. So leave it at auto, and like I said, the TV will do the work for you. Now, if you're playing an HDR game like this and you wanted to make the image even more punchy, even more colorful and vibrant, you could set it to wide, which basically takes the source and expands the colors to the TV's native potential. Okay, so if the TV can do 99.6% DCI-P3, then it will take the source and it will expand it to just that 99.6% DCI-P3. Now, for HDR content, this is probably okay. It won't oversaturate your colors too badly. It'll probably look pretty good. And you can see here on Spider-Man, look at the red. Go from wide, auto, wide, auto. It's just a slight difference. It makes the image a little bit more colorful, a little bit more punchy. So I could see people actually enjoying this. But I could also see some people in certain instances saying that it looks a little bit too vibrant. It looks a little bit too colorful, on the, bordering on the point of it looking artificial. So your best bet would just be to leave it on auto and let the TV correctly select the right gamut for you. That's what I do. White balance. Usually I have games on warm 1 or warm 2, but this type of cool looking game, this type of comic-y, cartoony looking game almost in some respects, I like to keep it on the coolish medium side. Once you start getting warm 2 or warm 3, things just start looking too yellow, too kind of orangish. It just doesn't look right for this game. I think a nice medium setting really does look correct for this particular game, so that's where I leave it. Although it is very, very bright in medium, I will say that. Per usual, I do have blue set to -12 under the 2-point method. That's because LG OLEDs in general tend to run on the bluish side to begin with, so to try to compensate, to try to remove some of that excessive blueness, you can put blue to -12. I do that in most games. Color management, otherwise I don't touch. Peak brightness is set to high, which it should be for high dynamic range content. Noise reduction, MPEG noise reduction, smooth gradation, you don't need any of these things. They're just additional picture processing settings. And if you turn them on, you're gonna add latency or lag because you're adding video processing. You don't wanna add any latency or lag to your experience, so just leave them all off. And really, there's no need to add something like smooth gradation on. Look at the sky here. The LG C10 is a little bit prone to banding in certain games. I've noticed it before in Dirt Rally 2.0. When I look at the sky, I would see banding. Here, look at the sky. It's seamless. It looks beautiful. This HDR10 10-bit representation of color here is perfect. You don't see any banding. You don't see any gradations or shades of color. Everything is blended together nicely and looks seamless. It looks very realistic, the sky. It looks perfect. So in that respect, you really don't need to turn on smooth gradation in the picture settings. So noise reduction, MPEG noise reduction, smooth gradation, all off. Black level is set to auto. The TV will automatically select the right black level for you. And black level just refers to RGB range, whether it's limited or full. Just leave it on auto and the TV will select the correct black level based upon the PlayStation 5 settings. And I think in the PlayStation 5 settings, I have the RGB range set to automatic. So the TV and the console in 99% of instances will get your black level right for you and your RGB range right for you. Motion eye care is set to off. Basically, it's the TV taking it upon itself to change brightness values based on content that it's displaying. I wouldn't recommend you do this. You don't want your TV to start dimming itself here and there. Just turn that off. True motion I have off. It says user, but it's off. If you were so inclined, you could set BFI to low, maybe. You don't lose too much brightness by setting it to low. And it does make your movement a little bit smoother. But to really benefit from black frame insertion or OLED Motion Pro, you need to set it to high. But when you set it to high, you can see perceptible flicker, which I've talked about before in my other videos, and it can make the image just way too dark. And then when you start playing this game, when it's, say, like a nighttime setting, you end up crushing your blacks. It's a mess. Which is unfortunate because OLED Motion Pro or BFI set to high, it really does improve motion clarity and motion resolution, but it's not worth it if the cost is going to be, you know, black crush and you're going to lose all of your brightness. It's just not worth it. So I tend to leave it off. I mean, the LG C10 has such a high pixel refresh rate and low latency to begin with, or input lag to begin with, that you really don't need to be turning things like OLED Motion Pro or BFI on, so I have it off. And let me just say, I have an RTX 2080 Super and Ryzen 3950X, and I've been playing a lot of games in 4K 60 with, you know, high settings on textures, so I've gotten a taste of what next-gen gaming will look like with, you know, playing with Resident Evil 3 on my 2080 Super, things like that in 4K 60. But I gotta say, Spider-Man Miles Morales really does kick it up a notch. Look at these textures in the wall. Like the cracks. Everything is so defined and so sharp. And I know I said that at the beginning of this video. That's what struck me the most about this leap from PS4 to PS5 is the textures, the surfaces, the ray tracing. It's all so clean. It's also crystal clear. And of course, it doesn't hurt that it's on a beautiful LG C10 OLED panel. So guys, honestly, I am very, very happy with this game's image quality. And like I said before, this is merely a launch game, so who knows what Sony and other first-party developers for Sony and the PlayStation 5 have up their sleeve years down the line once they've learned how to get more power out of this PlayStation 5 console. Games are going to look truly amazing this generation. I really feel that. You know, they might not always run in 4K 60, never mind 120 frames per second. But even when they are running in 30 frames per second like this, you're going to be having native 4K, you're going to be having ray tracing, you're going to be having excellent lighting. Everything is going to be, you're going to have, you know, 4K textures. Everything is going to be razor sharp. It really is going to be, I believe, a breakthrough generation. We're no longer CPU limited either, like we were with the PlayStation 4. That CPU really was that Jaguar 8-core CPU without multi-threading. That really was a bottleneck for last-gen GPUs. That bottleneck no longer exists here. What you have here with the PlayStation 5 is you have an 8-core 16-thread beast that is basically similar in power to the Ryzen 3700X. So the days of limiting a GPU or bottlenecking a GPU are over. You now have a capable GPU paired up with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 super fast RAM and a beastly 8-core 16-thread processor. So it's not only are textures and native 4K resolution going to be commonplace this generation, but also, as we've seen with the additional NPCs, with the additional cars and traffic in this dynamic open world game, but games are going to become more complex. Simulations are going to become more complex. NPCs are going to become more capable. Physics is going to become more realistic. Interacting with NPCs is going to become more dynamic and fluid. And so all of those things are going to take a major, major leap this generation, and I really, really can't wait for it. It's truly a great time to be alive, and it's a great time to be a gamer, no doubt about it. So anyway, guys, hopefully you have found this video useful or enjoyable in some way, and if you have, please let me know in the comment section down below. And if you have liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you can. And we will see you guys soon for more PS5 content. All right, guys, later. Woo!